What's up, everybody? It's Pastor Rob. Welcome to another Urban Discipleship podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the existence of God, really springboarding off this conversation between Dr. McDowell and Coleman Hughes. Have you heard of the flying spaghetti monster? Let's get into it on another Urban Discipleship podcast.
Urban Discipleship Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Urban Discipleship podcast, where we always endeavor to do two things: that is, exalt Christ and enhance relationship. I think this is going to be the second video as we go through the conversation between Dr. McDowell and Coleman Hughes. Remember, Dr. McDowell is a Christian apologist. Coleman Hughes is an atheist and political commentator. And so, shout out to both of those men. I'm going to link to Dr. McDowell's channel as well as the previous video in this series. Okay, so be sure you check that out. But we're going to jump right into another part of the conversation here. Coleman Hughes, as I said before, he is an atheist. He's going to be explaining why he's an atheist, and what does he mean by that? Because there are different understandings of what an atheist is. So Dr. McDowell tees him up, and then we'll get into what Coleman is saying.
Agnostic, you're not sure, don't have an answer to it. Why don't you consider yourself an agnostic first?
So yes, if you watch the previous video, Dr. McDowell asked Coleman Hughes, why is there something rather than nothing? What was Coleman Hughes's understanding of the origin of the universe? Coleman Hughes, to make a long story short, pretty much said that he doesn't know. And McDowell is explaining that's more of an agnostic stance, saying like, I don't know. It's a possibility that there is a God. Atheist standpoint usually is more it's usually more affirmative, would be that there is no God, instead of positing that I don't know if there's a God. Some atheists will have a different stance, saying that that's possible, but they just don't believe in God. Okay, let's see what Coleman has to say.
This is an atheist, and when you say you're an atheist, there's even debate about the term. What do you mean by that term?
Oh, yes. So I guess by atheist, I mean someone who doesn't believe in God the same way I don't believe in, like I'm not agnostic about Zeus and Athena, and
Okay.
And most religious people aren't.
Okay, he's really breaking down. He's really breaking down where he stands in his understanding of there being a God. He compares what I would say, because he's talking to a Christian. So let's just stick with the Christian God, the God of the Bible. He compares this understanding and belief of the God of the Bible. He says he wouldn't say that he's agnostic about some Greek myth God like Zeus or Athena, and so he compares his stance and his relation to Zeus and Athena. His understanding of Zeus and Athena is the same as his understanding of the God of the Bible. He would not say that he is agnostic against, as is to say, he would not say that he's agnostic concerning those gods. And so, in the same way, he would say that he is not agnostic against when considering the God of the Bible.
Aren't agnostic about the monkey god of some whatever.
Sure.
And so I would acknowledge it. I mean, it's possible theoretically that God exists. It's just, to the extent that I've seen no evidence for it, I put the Christian God in the same category I put as Zeus and Athena, namely.
Okay. So there he does say it is possible that a God exists. So I would probably place him in that camp of atheists that would feel free enough to postulate that it is possible that a God exists. However, they do not believe that a God exists, which is a softer stance than saying there is no God. Okay. So I will put Coleman in sort of in that category, but he says something here. He says to the extent that I do not see any evidence of a God. Okay, so again, Dr. McDowell is doing such a great job of allowing Coleman to speak and get his views and understand. Now, again, Coleman is a very smart, intelligent young man, graduate from an Ivy League school, and I believe his degree is in philosophy. So he knows what he's talking about. He knows how to put a logical argument together. And Dr. McDowell, you can see his heart is not to have an argument with Coleman Hughes, and that's where so many of us Christians fail, especially when we get into the area of apologetics, and just talking about what we believe and why we believe. By the way, I have a graduate degree in Christian apologetics, a master's degree in Christian apologetics. I probably never said that on the podcast, so if you don't know, now you know. And so I've had these conversations so many times, and I can remember even when being in class, you can tell that some of the students were really there to really get their arguments out, and not. And I pray for the hearts of everyone, but you can tell when someone really wants to argue with others about what they believe and not necessarily understand where people are coming from. We, as apologists, we as Christians, always have to understand behind every question is a questioner. And we have to be sensitive to where people are coming from, where their hearts and minds are, because ultimately, if they never come to an understanding of Christ and a belief in God and faith in Jesus Christ, we want them to leave with a great impression of what a Christian is and how a Christian interacts with those that we differ with. This comes from Peter. He instructs us to be to always give an account of what we believe, but to do that in a winsome manner. Okay, let's continue.
Stories that can be deeply inspiring and moving, and that I like origin myths that are powerful.
Correct. So he said, to the extent that I did not see any evidence. So Dr. McDowell doesn't question him on the possible evidence. I want you to go back and watch the previous video. I talked about a little bit of the evidence, just understanding that there is evidence in the universe that points to the universe having a beginning. We Christians understand that beginning of the universe to be what we call God, this timeless, spaceless, immaterial, personal being who is all powerful enough to create all physical nature, all of the universe. Okay, and so that's what we mean when we talk about God. Coleman says, to the extent that he hasn't seen any evidence. Again, not to argue, but for Christians, as we watch this, as we are aware of the conversations throughout society, well, then the question is, okay, well, then what evidence have you wrestled with? And he's going to get into that a little later. He gets into that a little later. This is a great interview by Dr. McDowell, because then he asks him, well, is there anything that gives you cause to pause? It says that, well, because of what I see here, there may be a God, and Coleman does a good job at answering that. But let's continue in this vein.
But are not literally true.
Okay. Is there any evidence you've seen that gives you pause?
Okay. Before we go there, I want to focus on Coleman's pointing to Zeus and Athena, because you hear this kind of objection a lot of different places. And if you've ever had conversations about the existence of God, one of these things is where you might hear, well, you Christian, or just say Pastor Rob, you're an atheist too, right? You don't believe in all the other gods, but you believe in the God of the Bible. I'm just atheistic about one more God than you are. Or you might hear, how do I know that, then this is on evidential terms. Oh, how do I know that there isn't just some flying spaghetti monster in the sky? You might hear people derogatorily speak about all Christians and these theistic people with their sky daddy. These sort of things. So how are we to understand that? Is there anything that we can say in response to these things? And I wrote something, and I was like, oh man, this is a great time. I wanted to. So I was reading a article, and it was a poem that was written in school. I think it was high school, but these students were exploring these sort of topics. I'm going to read the poem for you, okay? It's called Unicorn. God is like a mythical creature, a unicorn with silver blood. If you drink the blood, you will live forever. It makes a good story in a book like Harry Potter. The idea of God makes young children laugh and feel safe at night. But when you grow older and see the evil in the world, and the face of death like a shadow behind the eyes of every living thing, then where is God? Then God is revealed in all of his foolishness, a naked lie, a childish dream, a mythical creature like a unicorn. Okay, so I wrote a blog on that poem. So in that poem, there's really two arguments against the existence of God. One is the problem of evil. We should do another we'll do another video on that, but we also talked about that a little bit when we talked about Nick Cannon and the passing of his infant son. Okay, so I'm going to link to that video as well. I want you to watch the video because we talk about the sovereignty of God, the existence of evil. Why do bad things happen to the people? How are we Christians supposed to understand that? But also in this poem, you see the objection of what I call the unicorn or the spaghetti monster, Zeus or Athena. Here, how do we respond to that? We must be clear on what we mean when we're talking about God. The second objection I see here, I'm reading from my own words, is that God is no different than the idea of unicorn. Many believers get stuck when our view of a theistic God is compared to mythical creatures. The unicorn isn't special in this case. See, there's no difference, no matter what the mythical creature is. It could be Zeus, Athena, or in this case, in this poem, the unicorn. God has been compared, listen, I'm writing these my own words. God has been compared to the ideas of Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, Zeus, and the flying spaghetti monster. Two things are needed to respond to this line of argumentation. First is the definition of what we mean by God. We mean a timeless, spaceless, immaterial, personal being. Second, is to understand the definition of what is meant by the mythical creature. What do we mean by a unicorn? What do we mean by Zeus? What do you mean by Athena? Because when we look for clarity, again, we don't want to argue against a point that a person isn't even standing upon. So when we hear Zeus, Athena, the unicorn, this flying spaghetti monster, the question we have is what do you mean by that? Okay, and then I sort of break that down a little bit. By God, the Christian theist generally means a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, logically necessary being who is the creator and designer of the universe, and who is the moral standard for good and evil. What can we say about the unicorn? Is it like a horse? Is a horse-like creature with a horn with magical abilities? Well, the differences become clear as we try to look for clarity and define these terms. These differences become clear. Ideas of horses, creatures, and horns only have context inside the real universe. Okay, so in the case of unicorn, right? Like some of the questions, yeah, well, you know, is what do we even say? Is this unicorn made out of matter? You know, how do you even the understanding of unicorn, right? We have to understand it in terms of our own universe, and so when we're thinking about what is it made out of, or how does it move, or how does it behave, what can you understand about it? What do you mean? That's what we mean when we ask, what do you mean? We want clarity. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? And so once those terms are defined, then we get down to the distinction. We're talking about a timeless, spaceless, immaterial being, logically necessary, who is the creator and designer, and creator, designer of the universe, and the standard for good and evil. And so from that basis, we say, well, does this existence that we have as human beings, can we look at how we exist and how we live, and does it point to that personal God being out there? And I talked a little bit about this in the last video. As we look at nature, we know the universe is expanding, and so we look the contraction of the universe as we go back through time. It leads us to believe that the universe came into being. We look at the design of nature. It looks to be fine-tuned and designed for the purpose of human flourishing. And then we look at our understanding of right and wrong. How come we all have this sense of morality that it seems to be universal to all humanity? And how come we are incapable of grounding it within our own existence, our own reality? It seems to have a need to be grounded outside of ourselves so that it can be objective, so that it can be a standard that we point to outside of ourselves, that never moves, that never changes. We believe that standard to be God. Okay, let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, we probably got one more video from Coleman and Dr. McDowell, but I want to know what you think. Leave us any questions you might have. We really appreciate it. I'm gonna let you go and remind you to do two things: that is, love God and each other.
Urban Discipleship Podcast.